Hey everyone, Kevin here. All right, guys, today's the day that I'm going there. Let's talk about arming teachers in the classroom. So, what prompted me to finally talk about it? Well, on the news recently, a private school in Iowa has decided to enact a policy that vets and trains educators to carry guns in class for the protection of students from school shootings. Even though there are some states which already have regulations that permit armed teachers under certain circumstances, I realize that since we're now seeing an example where a school blatantly comes out and says they're arming teachers, it was kind of the right time to discuss it. Now, before I start going through this hotly debated topic, to put it mildly, I wanted to preface everything and admit my own biases up front to all of you before anyone asks. I am very pro Second Amendment and pro law enforcement. I believe that penalizing gun owners and by extension now teachers for exercising that right is a mistake. That being said, I cover topics with a very even hand, and am really tired of just seeing one side or another yelling at each other all the time rather than talking over it. That's just not who I am and doesn't get us anywhere. So I will be looking at this objectively because I am sure I already have people watching who are just waiting to shout at me for my earlier stance, without waiting to hear the rest of my perspectives on this matter because they really should first. Okay, now that's out of the way, let's look at the positives and negatives of arming educators. On that plus side, you will have a more rapid response to an active shooter crisis when it occurs, because whether you like the police or not, they don't always arrive as quickly as you might like them to, particularly in such a rural area like Iowa, for instance. It takes anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes for most police to respond, and the majority of active shooter events end within those first 5 minutes before police even arrive. Now, the general rule of thumb for when a police officer arrives at the event is that they go in, whether they have backup or not, and do whatever they can to immediately end the threat and limit injury and death. However, we've seen clear failures with this policy, most notably in Uvalde, Texas, which is one of the most pro gun states in the country, by the way, where 19 students and 2 teachers were killed and a further 17 wounded because the police chief refused to act decisively as he was supposed to. The Justice Department's report literally just came out in January, calling the response a quote, cascading failure for this exact issue. No matter how anti gun you may be, can't you at least entertain the notion for a moment that an armed teacher might have prevented this horrific tragedy? If we are ultimately responsible for student safety, then we shouldn't dismiss the possibility that having armed teachers may help with maintaining the level of safety we want. This is exactly what prompted Casey Hansen, a middle school teacher in Utah, to get a permit to carry a weapon. She said, and I quote, I was in my second year of teaching, and it broke my heart to think all the teachers could do was huddle their kids on a corner, stand in front of them, and pray that nothing was going to come through the classroom door. Kind of hard to deny that positive. But unfortunately, that's where the positives on this topic actually end. I'm serious. That's the only thing I can see here that would warrant armed teachers. And believe me when I say there is a serious list of negatives that go against this. Even the United States Concealed Carrier Association, which promotes people carrying weapons all the time, clearly stated how there are so many issues with actually putting such a policy into place. Just think of all the moving parts to do this, and you start to understand the enormity of the problem. Number one, the amount of training someone requires to follow basic gun safety rules and become at least an adequate user takes time and repeated practice. Police officers have to routinely re-qualify on their weapons for that reason, and starting from scratch is a lengthy process. Plus, you don't know how you're actually going to react until something like that happens. You could have received the best training in the world, but shooting at paper targets on a gun range and getting shot at are two very different things. Not all people are cut out to use weapons, much less use them in a situation where they're getting shot at themselves. Number three, there's also the reality that it can add more chaos to an already rapidly evolving situation. When police begin to clear the area, they may mistake the teacher for the shooter and open fire on them instead. It's a really tricky situation for both sides to be involved in. And number four, This is also why the liability alone is a massive problem. Think of the fact that schools would need to purchase liability insurance for this, if they can even find a carrier that would take on that risk, and teachers would then also be responsible to keeping the weapon away from students who may try and take it from them, thus causing the exact violent situation they're trying to prevent. There was even an incident of a negligent discharge in Utah of a sixth grade teacher shooting a toilet because she ignored basic gun safety rules. So, what you're seeing here is an overwhelming number of negatives that outweigh that one single positive. But we can't ignore that positive either. This is why, if I had been given the option, I would have absolutely carried a firearm as an educator. I have the required personality and respect for the weapon and what it would take to carry it. But most people don't. This is why I think you need to have a very specific kind of teacher who can shoulder this responsibility and not just make a blanket statement that you're going to do this, because not everyone's cut out for it. And not just due to personality or preferences, but because, again, you would just be adding yet another new job for educators to perform. We do enough already, and we shouldn't have to assume the role of school resource officer either. It shouldn't have to come to that when there are better options out there. So, my verdict is that if you can overcome the obstacles and you have a teacher who could actually do this responsibly, then we should be accommodating of that. However, arming teachers is not a solution in and of itself. It's just another band aid for a system that's inherently broken now. I may be pro gun, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to straight advocate for arming teachers because it matches with that stance. There needs to be a measured conversation here with clear procedures in place for those who might choose to do this. Because as I said, the negatives here kind of do outweigh the only positive. And on that note, I think I will end here today. I hope that was an even handed conversation enough for all of you, and I welcome any comments or questions you may have on this topic. As I always say, I'm here to help. See you next time.